Joining us now, Senator Todd Young of Indiana. He was the lead Republican sponsor of a China competition bill that helped form the basis of the current CHIPS legislation. Do you have any second thoughts about what the normal sort of Republican or maybe even libertarian viewpoint would be on a public-private partnership, essentially, on what this is, Senator? In other words, the federal government historically is not great at picking winners and losers in the economy, and not great at implementing strategies where they do things like that.
Yeah, Joe, thanks for having me on. Well, I will say the federal government historically has been actively involved since at least the Civil War in investing in basic research. This legislation does that not just with respect to semiconductors, but hypersonics, quantum computing, et cetera. And it also has a really important role to play with respect to national security. And this is a national security bill, which is why we have so much support from the generals, the admirals, Trump national security officials, and those in this current administration, and frankly, why we have a lot of bipartisan support to get this done quickly.
Do you think that, just frankly speaking, do you think we're seeing all the controversy about Speaker Pelosi and Taiwan, et cetera? In the back of everyone's mind, do you think that the frailty of our chip supply because of a dangerous world, is that what's behind it, or is it jobs? Because I could see where you'd want to bring Silicon Valley to the rest of the country, to all different parts of the country, and do the technology there. But in the back of our mind, is it really about that Taiwan eventually goes to China?
I mean, it's actually about both. So, we source all of our high-end computer chips, mostly from Taiwan, some from South Korea. And we just can't be that dependent on a country so far away from the continental United States for our missile system chips, for the components that go into our radars and our aircraft and so forth. So this is an effort to do exactly what all other large economy countries are now doing, which is to incentivize the location of these chip fabrication plants into the United States. And naturally, many of them will be located across the heartland in states like Indiana, which I happen to represent. Of course, rank-and-file Americans are excited about the economic opportunities, and they should be. We're very good at making things and making high-end things very well. But they should also understand that there's a national security imperative for this so that we can be more resilient the next time a pandemic or any sort of natural disaster occurs. And also, if there's a geopolitical event, whether that's the intentional distortion of markets by a state capitalist economy like the communist Chinese, or an interruption on account of design by the Chinese communist leaders. So we need to be resilient against that sort of thing. That's why this is a national security investment.
Senator, it's a real there is a real price tag for it. It's a fair amount of money, and other critics, maybe from the right, have said you could go across the board with all companies and do a research and development tax credit. You could do make it easier to write things off. You could not raise corporate taxes. There's so many other ways that you could do it and spend that money where you're not saying, okay, we're just doing this to the semiconductor industry. Then the other critic would say, now you're going to have every company that competes with China coming to you hat in hand and saying, you help the chip makers. Look what they're dumping this. They're doing that. They're non-competitive here. We need a subsidy, too. Where's our subsidy? And both of those things are slippery slopes.
Well, listen, our job is to navigate these slopes as members of Congress, as elected officials. And I can provide a real distinction between a high-end computer chip, which essentially is needed to run a modern economy. Anything with an on-off switch, frankly, requires a computer chip these days. So this is not only the petroleum of the 21st century. This is a higher value added, and we have to have our own strategic source of these. But I would also say that, to the extent others come hand in hand to us, I will push them back. Those who argue for broader R&D incentives to this level of generosity won't be well received here in Congress. I do favor, in fact, my name is on it. I introduced an extension of the existing R&D deduction. We want to make it a credit for high growth companies. So I've tried to I've tried to socialize that idea and see if we might get that passed. It's really important that we incentivize research and development. We have the most innovative people, the most creative businesses in the world, and I think before year's end, we may meet with success with respect to that R&D provision in our tax code as well.
We still do lead the world in the technology and in chip making equipment. We lead the world, and in the intellectual property. A lot of what we're importing are just commodity type chips, where it makes more sense in some respect. For labor and other issues, maybe not to make all of them here. So once again, the government's getting involved with capital allocation, which there's a few instances, I guess, where they're not public-private partnerships, but a lot of times it's not a good outcome. It's wasteful.
Well, if you'll allow, just briefly, sir, I think it's an important point you brought up. The differential in price between a chip made in Asia and a chip made in the United States, very little of it has to do with labor or environmental standards, the sort of things we typically think about as we analyze comparative advantage. Instead, they're related to incentives. So when you have Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, Communist China, European countries all offering incentives to locate there, you know as well as I do that companies look to the next marginal investment return. Where can I get the highest ROI for my owners for that next dollar invested? If we don't have these sorts of incentives that other countries do, we're not going to be able to attract the capacity here, and frankly, we won't be resilient. The other thing I'd say is we're not ahead in some technologies. Hypersonic technology, which is used to carry nuclear weapons, the Chinese are actually ahead of us. Again, a national security investment. Artificial intelligence, Eric Schmidt and his National Security Commission on this have indicated that within a couple of years, China could pass us with respect to AI, which will be critical to fighting and winning 21st century wars. So it's really important that we make these investments now, lay the seed corn for future growth and resiliency in the future.
All right, Senator. Thank you. Is Speaker Pelosi, what's the, I haven't seen today. Is that trip still on? Do you know? Is that?
Gosh, I hope she doesn't pull any punches there. She needs to visit now that the president has spoken out, and we need to send a message to the Chinese Communist Party that we will defend those fabs. We will defend our Taiwanese friends if necessary.
Yeah. What a world. All right, Senator, appreciate it. Thanks. Good to have you on.
Thank you.